Hello and welcome everyone to the first module of the EDMO training series on climate disinformation. So as you know, this is the first part of a two-part training series on climate disinformation. Today we will be looking specifically at the issue of understanding climate disinformation. And the idea is that we will explore the problem of climate disinformation, its history, the actors behind it, and its narratives in different European countries through the experience of a number of EDMO hubs. We have a number of excellent expert trainers here with us today who will talk us through this exciting program. So first of all, we will start with Philip Newell. Philip is the communications co-chair of the Climate Action Against Disinformation Coalition and has worked on climate disinformation for a number of years, including on monitoring deniers in their digital habitats, debunking false narratives pushed through mainstream media, and even helping fact checkers check their facts. And Philip will tell us more about how digital media made it easier to use climate disinformation to reshape public perceptions, starting from the history of climate obstruction in Europe and telling us more about how industries use public relation tricks to spread disinformation. The training session will then present the work of two EDMO hubs investigating climate disinformation in different European countries across Europe, starting from the experience of the Baltic Engagement Center, BESID, one of the EDMO hubs, and moving on to the experience of the Central European Digital Media Observatory, CEDMO, another EDMO hub. We will then conclude with a pre-recorded interview with Jos Delbecque, who will tell us more about EU policy against disinformation and the facts behind some of the common disinformation narratives. Without further ado, I will hand over to Philip and then introduce the other trainers as we go along. Thank you. Philip, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm excited for my portion of today's talk on climate disinformation, how big carbon is sabotaging climate action, and because I can't help myself, a little bit on what we can do about it. For starters, I am the Climate Action Against Disinfo Coalition's communications co-chair, as mentioned. Here's a little picture of me doing a version of this in real life. For the person at the last panel who was like, yeah, you should establish some credibility, so we believe you, like Yale's letting Rando on panels. Anyway, as mentioned, I've done this for a little over 10 years now. My background is in environmental policy and sustainable development. Over the course of my last job at Climate Nexus, I wrote in total something like 2 million words about climate disinformation through a daily disinfo readout, monitoring the yucky places online, and then pulling out what people need to know about that to do something about disinfo. So to get started, you are probably not of the misbelief that climate change is a hoax, but that doesn't mean you haven't been influenced by climate disinfo, because no one is immune to propaganda. So here's a little pop quiz. 2 quick questions. You can jot down the answer, you can note them to yourself, you can write it in the chat even if you'd like. But basically, this is what's going to show us how disinfo impacts even us. So 2 key questions. What % of people globally want more climate action from their leaders? And what % of people in your country would give 1% of their income a month to address climate change? All right, take a second, think about your answers. First one coming up, it is 80 to 89% of the global public wants more climate action from their leaders. Over the past 10 years, we can see that some of the efforts to address the consensus gap within the public of people not understanding that there's a consensus among scientists of 97%, that was one of the big impacts of disinfo, was making people think that it was a 50-50 split among scientists. So through efforts like Covering Climate Now's 89% project, we've largely addressed a lot of that gap between the reality that scientists would agree and the disinfo counter reality that, like, oh no, scientists are split. Not quite in line with it, but we're getting closer. So that's good news, obviously. Climate policy is really popular. Unfortunately, we don't have it everywhere. Why? Because big business invests in politics and propaganda to prevent regulations on pollution and their harmful products, and they use climate disinfo to obstruct climate action. So where's it coming from? kind of the wrong question. I often hear disinfo being described as though it's a naturally occurring phenomenon we can't avoid, a fog that comes in on little cat feet, and a grammatically active subject that's capable of doing things like its own sentient, living, breathing person. But it's not. Disinfo is a tool, it's a tactic, it's a grammatically passive object that the powerful use to maintain the status quo. And that's on whom we need to focus. To answer the question about where, though, historically, it does turn out there's one consistent export still reliably made in America: climate disinfo. This is going to feel perhaps a little heavy on US and English language content. You're not wrong. I did my best to include examples from Europe, but the US and in English is where the industry has been engaged the longest and the loudest. So that's where we see the most content. It's also been borne out in reports on the past when we looked at Spanish language digital disinfo. In 2022, we found that the most popular Spanish climate liars were basically just reposting and translating content from their English-speaking counterparts. But by 2023, as you can see in this graph, Facebook, Insta, Twitter, and other social media had so effectively incentivized lying about extreme weather events that false allegations that wildfires were set to clear land for renewable energy projects, which originally came out of Spanish language Twitter, those were being translated by digital disinfluencers and spread in English as well. So you can see the timeline here of first happening in Chile, and then a little bit in English, and then Spain, and then a ton in Canada in English, and then with the Greece wildfires also in English. That popular misinfo sort of translation route, that's still largely the exception to the rule there. It's an example of how social media has made it so much easier for anyone and everyone to benefit from lying, and not just those who are working deliberately on behalf of the industry to spread disinfo. Those professionals, though, are the ones who are directly sabotaging climate action. So that's who I think needs to be stopped. The disinfo playbook is what the Union of Concerned Scientists and Jennifer Jacquet and other experts have documented, is how the industry creates and spreads these lies in order to justify the status quo and hold on to its political power. But it also works on activists. Another study shows how. Back in the 1990s, in response to studies showing that beef is really bad for the climate, civil society groups asked for a 50% reduction in beef consumption, as was sort of scientifically what we needed to do. The industry, of course, did not like that and responded with disinfo and propaganda and a major ad campaign. And a decade later, then, activists were so sort of harangued by that, were so shell-shocked by that, they weren't asking for a 50% reduction, even though it was even more important and scientifically we needed an even bigger reduction. But instead, the ask was just for a meatless Monday, just for a 1/7 reduction. All those years later, and instead of 50%, we're just asking for 1/7. And even that got significant industry blowback. So the better question is, who is the disinfo coming from? Lies don't spread themselves. They need people. And it takes a lot of bullshit to overcome the overwhelming scientific consensus. And to be effective, it's got to look like it's coming from a lot of different places. So polluters and propagandists will not only spread their messages themselves directly through ads and spokespeople, they'll also prop out others to do so, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly through disinformation subsidies. Instead of giving money, at least at first, they're providing the rhetoric and communications products that people need to get mad at climate scientists for otherwise no reason. So the diagram here is from the Climate Social Science Network's book on climate obstruction across Europe. It shows the dynamic, which is the same pretty much all over the place. Industry and the rich fund lobby groups, advertising, and universities to create disinformation that's then spread through their blogs and propaganda outlets and mainstream media through ads, and then coupled with campaign financing to influence both the public and policymakers. This is how moneyed interests create and spread disinfo as fertilizer to grow their quote unquote grassroots online groups into a thriving political opposition. But it's not organic grassroots. It's fed on corporate propaganda and disinfo. So it's industrial astroturf. While each country is distinct, thanks to the book's profiles on each individual one, we can also see some common themes across them. Germany is a pretty typical example you can see here, with key industry actors, their formal trade and lobby associations, and their informal and indirectly funded think tanks, all working together to either manipulate or create and operate media that's then used to mobilize a right-wing political opposition to decrease ambitions among activists and lobby against climate policies. Now, social media is supercharging the whole process. In mainstream media, lies are generally kept at bay by fact-checking. But in most online spaces, well, nobody knows you're a doll. Take the three owned dailies, for example, US English outlets. But in 1 year, the Daily Caller got nearly 40% of its revenue from Koch Industries and Philanthropies and Related Networks, one of the major fossil fuel-backed companies spreading disinfo. It's also who's behind the Heritage Foundation, which incubated the Daily Signal. Meanwhile, a different fracking fortune entirely blessed the Daily Wire and PragerU with over $10 million of their own. Then Breitbart got $10 million from the Mercers, and Russia gave Tenet Media $10 million to grow their podcasts. So if you have $10 million to set up a fake news website, you certainly can. Could you then grow it? Maybe not without some help from your friends. In this case, specifically, talking about Facebook, aka Meta, aka the Rate Your Classmates ripoff that got way out of hand. Back in 2009, Mark Zuckerberg hired somebody named Joel Kaplan, and Facebook's been a disinfo and right-wing propaganda machine ever since. Why? Because as deeply reported by Wired in a piece you can click through it and go read at some point when you have some time, Joel Kaplan repeatedly let Breitbart and the Daily Wire and other right-wing disinfo spreaders off the hook for breaking what few rules Facebook had against coordinated inauthentic activity, like creating self-promotion spam rings to grow your $10 million operation into a thriving propaganda producer. He lets them off because he's friends, because he's on the same team. Meanwhile, Google and YouTube have a policy against climate disinfo, but they don't ever really seem to enforce it unless somebody else points it out. And now they're getting even more lazy about their moderation. Spotify, meanwhile, pays Joe Rogan handsomely to babble with idiots for hours on end, and ex-Twitter, well, this portion redacted to avoid a slap lawsuit from the world's richest and most divorced free speech man baby. Anyway, speaking of Joe Rogan, this is some great research by Media Matters, and it caused quite a stir recently. But it looked different to me than most people because I didn't see it as a response to popular demand of what people want. Because I see that almost half of those big red bubbles are billionaire-backed outfits. So I don't see podcasts. I see propaganda. Big Carbon, another billionaire dark money, built up Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles, Matt Walsh, Dennis Prager, Charlie Kirk, Candace Owens, Tom Fitton, Dan Bongino, Dinesh D'Souza, and Steven Crowder, whose rejection of a $50 million contract as not enough by half resulted in the guy at the Daily Wire responding that when he met Steven Crowder, quote, he was paid by PJTV, which was owned by a billionaire at the time. Then he was paid by CRTV for a number of years, which was owned by a billionaire at the time. Then he worked for The Blaze, which was subsidized by a billionaire. So that's 11 of the bubbles. Then there's Tucker Carlson, Piers Morgan, Megyn Kelly, and Glenn Beck, who are all beneficiaries of Murdoch Media. And then there are the three literal, unwitting, they claim, Russian propagandists whose legal defense is that they're just useful idiots who didn't know they were being used by Russia to spread propaganda and climate disinfo. So in total, at least 18 of those big red bubbles have had major financial or institutional backing. So this image looked more like this to me. It's not a representation of demand, but of supply, of the infrastructure to spread propaganda and disinfo. So the takeaway of it isn't that podcast listeners, and by proxy the larger public, crave transphobic bigotry and hate and disinfo and Russian propaganda, so that's what we should give them. It's that if you spend $10 million on propaganda and are allowed to game social media platforms, you can build an audience. And with that audience, thanks to social media, you can really start to reshape reality. Because social media distorts how we think about the real world, one study calls it a funhouse mirror factory because social media exposes us to disinfo that we interpret as representative of popular beliefs widely held by lots of different people. But because just a relative handful of people post the vast majority of content online, with the Center for Countering Digital Hate once finding that just 10 publishers were behind 69% of Facebook's climate denial, it distorts our image of public opinion, like a funhouse mirror warps our image of ourselves. So this is another new study, and it compares how many people in countries around the world would give 1% of their income to fight climate change with how many people they think would also give 1%. The difference is the impact of disinformation. We think everyone else is much less willing to fight climate change because we're all exposed to the propaganda and disinfo, and we think other people are more susceptible to it. So here's the chart across Europe. Doesn't look the best in this slideshow, but if you see on the far side here, here's the percentages so that you can look for your country and see how popular climate policy is. Across Europe, we can see that it fluctuates. The basic dynamic, though, is around 80% of people want the government and other people to do more about climate change. That's the yellow and green bars you see that are really big. Then the blue bars are the 60 to 70% of people who say they would give 1%. But then the red ones, that's the minority who think that's what we think everybody else would do. The minority of others we think would do the same. So the most generous country is apparently Kosovo, with 84% willing to contribute, and also the most generous in their perceptions of others, with people expecting 48% of their fellow citizens to do the same. So this is the impact of disinfo. We think everybody else is a lot less willing to fight climate change because we're all so exposed to it, and we think everyone else is falling for it. So conspiracy theorists, funny enough, are just the opposite. And although they're in the minority of just 12%, tend to agree the vast majority, 93%, are with them. Then, as the Obstruction Across Europe book detailed, those out to sabotage climate action also target climate scientists and advocates and policymakers, and yes, you, the fact checkers, for hate and abuse and trolling and harassment. It's a form of lobbying. They're working the refs. And in more authoritarian regimes, they can simply criminalize climate advocacy. That way, anyone who does dare to speak out is punished for it. And thanks to the funhouse mirror effect, the effect is even bigger. Because if you think if one person is saying it out loud to me, then, oh man, there must be tons of people who agree. So disinfo doesn't make you think you're wrong. It makes you feel like you're alone. So it's not persuasion and it's not a debate. It's peer pressure. It's bullying. And it's been that way all along. So going back to the beef example, we're going to watch a little clip from The Simpsons from a 1995 episode where Lisa becomes a vegetarian. So the school shows the kids a video from their friends in the meat industry. And I think it's a pretty perfect demonstration of how this all works. So as a reward for sticking with me this far, we'll watch some cartoons and I'll look at the Q&A.
I have a crazy friend who says it's wrong to eat meat. Is he crazy?
No, just ignorant. You see, your crazy friend never heard of the food chain. Just ask this scientician. He'll tell you that in nature, one creature invariably eats another to survive. Don't kid yourself, Jimmy. If a cow ever got the chance, he'd eat you and everyone you care about.
Wow, Mr. McClure, I was a grade A moron to ever question eating meat.
Yes, you were, Jimmy. Yes, you were.
You're hurting me.
They can't seriously expect us to swallow that tripe.
Now, as a special treat courtesy of our friends at the Meat Council, please help yourselves to this tripe.
Stop it! Stop it! Don't you realize you've just been brainwashed by corporate propaganda? Apparently, my crazy friend here hasn't heard of the food chain. Yeah, Lisa's a grade A moron. When I grow up, I'm going to Bovine University.
All right, so I know that was silly, but it is actually a really good example because the propaganda didn't make Lisa start eating meat again. It just gave other people the rhetoric to use to attack her for it. And it normalizes and excuses that behavior to discourage others from following Lisa's example or even just voicing their agreement with her. The opponents of climate action use disinfo to inflate their perceived popularity as means to sabotage efforts to pass policies, protecting the public from the profit-generating pollution. All right, so real quick, what can we do about it? Debunkings and inoculations. Inoculations, weaken versions of the myth that you say, hey, you warn people about it, you're going to be seeing this. Yeah, you can do something about it. 2005, PBS's Arthur did the real basic version for digital disinfo. You really think someone would do that? Go on the internet and tell lies? Yes, you guys know that. That's what you deal with all the time. So the debunking handbook, and yes, I will share the slideshow so that everybody can see these and all the links. It's instructions for how to serve up a truth sandwich. And this is really the Bible of fact checking and of drafting fact checks and how you should structure these things. Because you don't want to lead with the myth. You lead with the fact that you're reinforcing. That's your big headline claim because that's what you want people to know. A lot of people are just going to see the headline, right? They're not going to click through and read the whole thing. So if you just put the disinfo in the headline and then you expect them to read it, you're going to be misleading some people. So you can consider disinfo like finding something glowing and radioactive in an old Cold War era syringe, right? You wouldn't just pick it up and be like, oh, it might be dangerous and toss it to your buddy and be like, hey, check it out, right? You'd want some like protective material to put it in, some bubble wrap, some things like that, so nobody gets hurt. The same is true for disinfo. You want to pack it within facts and reality. This truth sandwich, it works for fact checks, it works for all kinds of things, it works even for this presentation. And as you'll see, like, I don't spend a lot of time on the narrative themselves because those are mostly the excuses and they change and mutate over time. It's really the people you want to look at to serve up that fact, myth, fallacy sandwich. Now, to explain the fallacy, you can use the flicks of the trade. This is again from Skeptical Science, super handy, breaks down the different ways people create lies, essentially. The CAD Journalist Field Guide is another resource we really recommend. It has some very hands-on tactical tips for things like, again, don't put the disinfo in the headline, using the truth sandwich in action, and again, providing additional context on who's saying quotes, because a lot of times they're really heinous people who are really obnoxious, and what really matters is that they hang out with Nazis and consider white nationalists to be heroes and inspirations, and like maybe you don't need to take them seriously. Similarly, you should take seriously opinion pages. They are the last refuge of disinformation damned. They are where propagandists pose as pundits to spread disinfo. Just because it's opinion doesn't mean it doesn't deserve a fact check, and just because it's in a mainstream outlet doesn't mean it has been fact checked. You would be absolutely shocked at how lenient some of the opinion pages are about facts. The volume issue, the churn, everyday idiots that are out there posting. I would suggest not chasing down every viral lie and focusing on the professionals who are using disinfo to sabotage the policymaking process. And again, try to avoid engaging the disinfo frame directly with a back and forth. That's sort of the debate that the liars want, because it makes people's eyes glaze over and think, oh gosh, the science is really just back and forth on this. I don't know, I can't figure it out. So you really want to use that truth sandwich structure to make the actual facts and reality very clear as quickly as possible. And then you got to consider the source. Two main types. Organized disinfo. These are the people who I think we should focus on. These are what I consider the suits, the lobbyists who are aimed at policymakers and do very serious strategic work. What they don't do generally is post a bunch of nonsense online about, whatever lies. Those are the brutes. Those are the folks who are just chasing clicks, just want attention, just riding the algorithm, chasing advertised monetization, things like that. These people now are spreading plenty of climate disinfo because the former built that large audience for it. So the suits are boring, but calculating, and they're working on political schemes. The brutes, they just want attention. They want money. They want, they're kind of grifters. But when the suits and the brutes appear to be in cahoots, that's when you know you've got big trouble, because the strategic stuff is also getting popular. So take, for example, the recent surge of anti-trans propaganda here in the US of the last 5 years that has bled out everywhere else. It's the kind of thing that some might say climate groups or fact checkers should stay far away from. But turns out anti-trans organizations largely run on fossil fuel funding. So there's clearly a connection, and it's not subtle. Because climate denial is unpopular, they use hate to recruit instead, and are scapegoating trans people to build an audience. And in doing so, make the rest of us think that, hey, maybe we should throw the LGBT community under the bus for political expediency. But remember the podcast propagandists we saw earlier and the owned dailies, Wire, Caller, and Signal that I mentioned? Well, they've all been crucial in manufacturing this anti-trans backlash with podcasts and digital documentaries. The Daily Wire did 2 different ones, and glowing reviews of each other's videos, a veritable circle of jerks promoting hateful propaganda. Because again, climate policy is popular and denial isn't, so they needed something else to build support. So they turned to the age-old tactic of bullying people to make themselves feel big and tap into the manosphere audience. So if you wouldn't repeat their climate denial, why would you fall for their trans hate? Climate advocates and the rest of us need to stiffen our spines and stand up for trans rights as human rights. Because unfortunately, fact checks alone aren't going to be enough for disinfo. While I very much believe in them and think they're very important, they only stop people who want to be correct, but not everybody wants to be correct. Disinfo is not exactly like the medical world, where patient zero is somebody you can treat and then they'd stop spreading it. That kind of information deficit-based treatment doesn't work for disinfo because people are doing this professionally. And I use Typhoid Mary as the case study. Back in 1907, a doctor traced an outbreak of thousands of cases of salmonella to a single cook, who they then quarantined for 2 years and confirmed, yes, she was the source, told to stop cooking for people, wash her hands after she goes to the bathroom. But cooking's all she knew how to do for a living. They didn't train her to do anything else for those 2 years. So then she went out and got another job as a cook and killed 2 more people. And authorities had to quarantine her for the rest of her life. So not everybody wants to be healthy or correct. Some people get paid to cook, to lie. Fact checks aren't going to stop them. They're not enough because it's about power, not just words. Disinfo is part of the larger strategy that industry uses to protect itself from regulation. The rhetoric is used to justify harassment and violence against people speaking up for the environment. For example, CAD recently had an International Climate Information Integrity Summit in Brazil and heard from Cristiana Loscan, a researcher whose work takes her to communities being impacted by the industry, putting her squarely in the crosshairs, not metaphorically. She described how machine gun armed authorities would intimidate the communities she was studying. Then here's the kicker.
Eu sei quais são as empresas responsáveis por essa situação, todas essas situações que eu narrei. Só que eu não poderia falar aqui, porque se eu falasse aqui, eu correria o risco de ser processada, que é o que acontece com muitos cientistas que citam em artigos científicos ou em palestras o nome de empresas poluidoras ou causadoras de impactos climáticos.
Disinfo is not just about expressing words. It's an expression of power. So what can we actually do about climate disinfo? 3 broad categories. First, create consequences. For example, linking fact checks to platform performance so that fact-checked lies can't be constantly reposted and reviralized and made money off of. Unfortunately, as we all know, platforms seem to be turning their backs on connecting fact checks to enforcement mechanisms, and you should absolutely yell at them about that. Second, discrediting disinfluencers with opposition research so mainstream sources don't fall for their lies. Again, fact-checking the most prominent and professional users will erode their credibility, whereas publishing about random viral misinfo accounts sort of elevates their otherwise fringe status. They say, look how important I am, I got coverage, right? Whereas you fact-check a professional and it's like kind of embarrassing. Third, otherwise ostracizing enablers in the related industries that work for big carbon, like public relations, advertising, finance, tech companies, etc. People whose work is used to spread disinfo. You have to try and make it uncomfortable for professional liars to do their jobs by fact-checking them and creating whatever friction you can to make it clear climate policy is popular, and denial and disinfo is for losers. Because the disinfo itself is often just a distraction from whatever bad news the bad actors don't want the public talking about. And that's why we should talk about it. So from the local to international level, there are policy solutions. The Hague's got a fossil fuel ad ban that's been scaled up, that can be scaled up because it's popular and already has been replicated in 3 other cities in the Netherlands. The EU's social media accountability laws, we'll hear a little bit more about later, forcing big tech to provide some transparency. The CAD coalitions working with UN and groups around the world on a global initiative for information integrity on climate change. And even here in the US and elsewhere, we can sue the bastards. Litigation can be a powerful avenue to shut off the disinfo tap instead of trying to clean up the mess afterwards. After all, tobacco industry won tons of its cases before it started losing them. And then it got scared, then it settled. Now we don't have to see fossil fuel ads. Or sorry, tobacco ads. Blessedly, hopefully, we will soon not see fossil fuel ads too. But unfortunately, the disinfo ecosystem exists now to protect the industry from that public accountability. Disinfo isn't a debate, it's a bludgeon. It's used to destroy the role that media has played in connecting reality, public opinion, and political action, and replace it with its own closed disinfo ecosystem that isolates its audience from reality and allows its political actors to avoid accountability from their audience, while making the rest of us think they're more popular than they really are. More simply, propaganda and disinfo are used to sever and supplant the connection between public opinion and political action. We need to shatter the funhouse mirror to restore our shared reality. Because climate policy is popular, and if the situation were hopeless, they wouldn't be spending any of their profits on propaganda. I'm Phil Newell for the Climate Action Against Disinfo Coalition. Thanks for having me here today.
So now it's my great pleasure to hand over to Evita Purina. Evita leads ReBaltica's fact-checking session, Recheck. Previously, she worked as a correspondent for the leading Latvia Daily in Riga and Brussels, and as an editor-in-chief in one of the best regional newspapers. She was also the main content creator for Media Literacy Program, which was taught in schools, and was a regular contributor to Public Broadcaster's special fact-checking column. So, Evita, the floor is yours.
Thanks. So you are sharing my presentation. Thanks for all of you who are listening to this, and thanks for introduction. So I will give you a brief overview of climate disinformation in the Baltic states. I will mainly focus on Latvia, which I know best, of course, but I work pretty closely with my colleagues in Lithuania and Estonia. So, and I also contacted them, and we discussed the topic before this Zoom seminar. So first of all, the next slide, please. How big the problem is? I just put the screen from EDMO fact-checking monthly brief, the newest one from May this year. So you can see the light green line is climate change in a broader sense, also energy-related disinformation. And I can say that the situation in Latvia and in Estonia is pretty much the same. It is one of the main disinformation topics in recent years, and the difference is that from this picture is that we don't have or much less. There is much less disinformation on Israel-Hamas conflict and migration. Everything else is pretty much the same. The next slide. So back to disinformation about climate change. I would say that the key narratives are, I think, the same as in any other country in Europe. First, global warming is natural thing. There is no human impact. Then a lot of conspiracy theories, of course, are used, but they come in from other countries just to support this claim about all these California wildfires or chemtrails and cloud seeding, which are tied to climate change and people and like some global elites trying to fake the global warming and all that. And next, of course, we have a lot of disinformation aimed against European Union policies. The main narrative here is that the interests of the Baltic states are not being taken into account. I'm speaking about Green Deal, of course, that they are designed to squeeze money out of us and that we don't need any Green Deal since we are already among the greenest countries in the world. That is many people claim here. And we saw a lot of it before last year's European Parliament elections, of course. And the last thing here is the most topical issue currently is wind and solar energy. I will talk about this a bit later. Next slide. So who are these disinformation actors here? Again, pretty same as everywhere, well-known disinformation spreaders. We can call them super spreaders, persons who will tell lies about any topic which is currently on agenda. And they do it mostly on TikTok because of this Meta's fact-checking, third partner fact-checking program. We have squeezed them out from Facebook, I would say, because we write stories and we rate their false posts, and their reach and audience is impacted. So they go to TikTok, where there is nothing we can do there because in the Baltic states, TikTok doesn't cooperate with fact checkers. So we just sit and watch how different claims and different conspiracies also about climate change and all this green energy and all this is like they get. Some posts are getting even several hundreds of thousand likes or shares, so it's really impressive and dangerous, of course. of course, second thing is populist parties and even individual politicians from coalition parties. For example, 2 years ago, in Latvia, we had the Minister of Agriculture who declared publicly that climate change is, I quote, a religion, not science. So you can imagine what we can expect on the government table if the position is like that. And very recent new phenomenon is that the two mentioned groups somehow overlap because these well-known disinformation spreaders run in elections and even win seats. Just recently, this year, a month ago, in municipal elections, several such individuals were elected for the first time in Riga City Council. So the only thing they are known for is producing disinformation on social media. And this, for me, seems really scary. It's for the first time they are elected because political parties just attract them, recruit them to gain more popularity, to gain more audience, and it has started to work. Then comes media. Clickbait websites often spread different climate lies and regional or local media because, lack of professionalism, lack of knowledge, and so on. Next, please. As I said, the most prominent currently is wind and solar energy. Disinformation, at least for the for the last 12 months, I would say. Here are just a few examples in pictures, how it looks like. The next slide, please. And regarding these wind farms and solar farms, it should be noted that it applies to Estonia and particular to Latvia, just two countries, not to Lithuania, because in Latvia and Estonia there are a large number of new projects underway currently. In Lithuania, in opposite, it already has many wind farms, much more than here, for example, in Latvia. And therefore, this information in Lithuania is largely absent, and climate-related disinformation in general is much less common. What my colleagues are saying in Lithuania, I assume that people are just they see that there is no actual damage, that it works, and they shouldn't care about any wind. I don't know, dangers or something. This is also very interesting. Here you can see the key disinformation topics. I will not repeat them. Maybe the second one, it's quite interesting that, of course, we are on the edge of European Union next to Russia, and we are small, tiny countries, so there is some kind of perception that Europe wants to get rid of their wind farms, so they build them here to make money at our expense, because they don't need them anymore, they don't like them anymore, but it's false, of course. Next slide, please. Here I tried to put together the context and possible reasons of this surge or wave of disinformation. First, part of the people, we should admit that they are really afraid of the new modern turbines, which will be much taller even than the current ones. We have few of them, I don't know, maybe several tens, I don't know, 50 turbines in whole Latvia, maybe something like that. And now much bigger ones are coming, and people are obviously a bit afraid and concerned, and I can even understand them. there is lack of clear political support, even in the government, and therefore we lack some sufficient explanation to the public why we need it. The very politicians, they are like not. There is no consensus. Yeah, media responsibility, of course. Insufficient media understanding of climate issues and ways to cover them. I would say that there are no there are no journalists who have specialized in climate themes. We are usually the first who, I don't know, from other countries, some think tanks or researchers contact us and ask, can you suggest a climate journalist in Latvia? And I would say there's none. There's no such thing. So we are probably the only ones who work with these topics regularly. Yeah, and populist politicians and disinformation actors hijack the topic. What does it mean? Lately, we have noticed that both these populist politicians and disinformation actors who work together, sometimes they are not together, but they attend or even organize community meetings in municipalities where there are these wind farm plans. And then they give speeches, spread conspiracy theories at these meetings. Then they film them and post the videos on social media. And that means they create a distorted impression about public attitudes toward green energy projects and climate change policy as a whole. And it is dangerous because they somehow amplify this distorted reality, which in reality, the attitude is not so bad. The next slide, the last one. In reality, this public support is significantly higher, as we could imagine only seeing or observing or getting information from social media. As we see, for example, here, as much as 70% last year were in favor of building new wind farms. When you open some Facebook or even more TikTok, then you could get an impression that nobody wants wind farms or wind energy here. And this is, again, scary because, of course, some decision makers, they are influenced by this social media picture, which is not objective one. That's all from me.
Thank you so much, Evita, for this really interesting picture. And we can see that the public perceptions are also a key part of the picture in different areas. And Ivan will also tell us about public perceptions in the Czech infosphere. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Ivan Ruta-Kuka, who is a data analyst at EDMO in the Czech Republic. He has a long-standing research interest in environmental issues, particularly focusing on environmental education. And in his work, he applies experience gained from academic, nonprofit, and private spheres. And as I said, Ivan also will tell us about public perceptions in the Czech and Slovak population. So this is really the beauty of the EDMO network, that we can see the same problem in different European countries and what we see in terms of public perceptions and main narratives. So really, thank you both for joining and giving us the perspective from your own hubs. Ivan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lisa, for the kind introduction. So once again, my name is Ivan Ruta-Cuker. I'm located in Prague, and I must say in the beginning that it's a bit funny that we are talking about this issue right during the heat wave that engulfed Europe, and I can really feel it. My windows open, my doors open. I just turned my ventilator off, but I might have to turn it on because it's 30 degrees here. So it's ironic that the climate change is preventing me from delivering this presentation properly. So I'm sorry for any background noise that you might hear during. So once again, I'm from EDMO, which is located in Prague and working under the umbrella of Charles University. It's a multidisciplinary consortium. We are working together with several non-profit and public organizations. Our main focus is media literacy, so not just in the sphere of climate change, but in general. And what we focus most on is social research. So we gather opinions of respondents of several populations. So our main projects focus on a long-term questioning of Czech and Slovak respondents. From these two countries. We have some data from Poland, some from Hungary, and we just started a great project that takes place in 9 EU countries, but unfortunately, we're going to get the first data in a couple of weeks, so I'm not able to present it at this time. But I think building on what Philip was talking about, we saw that about more than 80% of the people worldwide demand some action from their leaders. And we're going to see some experimental probe into a population. I'm talking about the Czech population, which has been exposed to climate change denialism for decades from the very top of our political sphere. Our former president and now behind the scenes persona of Czech politics is a very prominent climate denialist, and there is almost no political opposition currently to this approach. So usually when we talk about disinformation, the main issue right now in Europe is obviously the war in Ukraine and this endeavor. So we assume that there is some foreign actor spreading these claims, but not in Czech Republic. These come from very, very prominent personas. So that's why I think that the Czech data might be very interesting, and Slovak also for comparison. So I have many graphs. I will try to skim through them as fast as I can, but if I'm not able to fit everything in the 20 minutes I have, then I will skip to the end where I have something interesting I also want to talk about. So first, the basic question regarding climate change awareness, whether people are sure that it's actually happening, and we see that about half, exactly half of the Czech population would not agree with the claim that they are unsure. So they are pretty much sure on whether it's happening or not. But when we look at the other figure, whether they think, it's always the case of the so-called human-made climate change hypothesis, in parentheses, because now it is clearly pretty much clear that the science is behind this hypothesis. But some people would still say that it's a naturally occurring process, and that number is relatively high, at least, or vice versa. The number of people who would disagree with this statement is relatively low. The same more or less goes for Slovakia. Also, exactly half of the population agrees that climate change, that they are sure that whether climate change is actually happening, and that it's a naturally occurring process. That's something that only about a third of them, one fourth would say. Moving on to some other general issues, we asked people in Czech Republic whether they feel personally engaged in environmental protection. And we see that the figures are not bad. 44% would say that they're personally involved in environmental protection. Also, this large gray part 27%. I don't know if you see my mouse, but I'm circulating around the gray area. More than a quarter would be somewhere between. They're not active, but they're not entirely passive. So that seems okay. And we also ask whether they believe the climate change and global warming is caused by mankind. So it's the other side of the question I showed you in the last slide. And in this manner, it seems that it's not that big as I thought it would be. Still there's 42% of people who think who agree that it is a man-made issue. But in Slovakia, the numbers are very much hopeful, more hopeful than in Czech Republic, especially when we're talking about the second figure, where we see that the majority of Slovaks agree that man-made climate is a fact, that it's not just a naturally occurring process. Okay. One of the things we always do on almost on monthly basis is that we ask the respondents whether how they would rate many issues as problems to Czech Republic. So we see that climate change, I highlighted it, is seen as a significant problem to Czech Republic by about 60% of the population. That is the majority. But when you compare it to other issues, you see that it's not as important as other issues. I like to quote something a little that I find a little funny. When you see any statistics about the Czech Republic compared to the European Union, we are always below average, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, media literacy, gender equality, racism. We are always below the average, usually somewhere on the bottom with Hungary. The one issue that we are actually good on is the state budget deficit. We have some deficit, but compared to other EU nations, it's relatively okay, and it doesn't appear to change largely. But it's been very important topics in Czech politics for decades. So now people perceive it as the most important problem to our country in long term. This is not something that occurred just in one wave. So compare it to climate change, there's just 60%. And yes, I also added racism. You can see it on the bottom. The majority of the people think that we don't have problem with racism. In Slovakia, the numbers are not much different. The largest problem for them is inflation, of course, from a list that was a little bit longer than what I'm showing you. But yes, there were just the main issues that are usually discussed in media. So inflation is the largest problem for them. Climate change is not on the second but last spot as it was in Czech Republic, but still it's just 62%. So it is not highest importance for the Slovak population. It might be because we think we don't see the climate change outside our door, but go back to where I started the presentation. I think there is something to see as a result, especially for farmers who have to change their practices immensely, even in our two Middle European countries. Yeah, when I prepared this graph, I thought that the results would change slightly more from wave to wave, but then they don't. So it now seems it's still almost a straight line. We were asking when people see in media some topics, how it is difficult to assess whether they're true or not. And I compared the war in Ukraine to the global warming and climate change. These are the sums of the answers. It is very difficult to comprehend the truthfulness of the issue, or rather difficult. So about 50% people say that it's difficult for them to assess the truthfulness of information they receive regarding the war in Ukraine. It's slightly less on the issue of climate change. So there's slightly above 40% of people who think that climate change is an issue where they have some problems to assess whether the information they're getting is truth or not. And I would say that this figure gives us a little hope, because maybe these people understand that they would like to be informed more properly on the issue. In Slovakia, the numbers are very much similar, slightly lower than in the Czech Republic. Yeah. We also, I should have said, we don't have as many data from Slovakia as we have from Czech Republic because we started here earlier. Another similar issue is whether people feel fatigue from the media information they are receiving. Because if some issue, we saw it during COVID, if some issue was highlighted by any media outlets, it was strongly on social networks, presented strongly on social networks, and just it seems like it's screaming on us from all the sides, then people start to feel tired and don't want to hear about it anymore, no matter how important the issue is. So we ask about whether people feel some level of fatigue from the issues. And again, from war in Ukraine, for comparison with climate change, about 2/3 of the Czech population feel a bit tired about the information they're getting regarding the war, and slightly more than half feels that they are tired of the information they're getting regarding climate change. So perhaps again, this shows that there is still some space for informing more, because obviously, if I'm gonna ridicule it a little bit. If we were to ask people if they're tired of seeing cute kittens on the internet, then probably about 50% will also say that, yeah, they are tired of it. So the above 50% figure is actually not that bad, and these are some guidelines to what to do, and that is to present climate change more, especially linked to some information. Because if we read articles about heat wave, and there is no any connection in the article to climate change, then it's, I believe, missing the point a little bit. Yeah, in Slovakia, yeah, the numbers are similar, and also it seems dropping when it comes to climate change. So in this part, I will focus a little bit on the future of what people expect from our political leaders. This is something we asked before the last European Parliament election last year. So we asked what issues should the European Parliament representatives focus on in the next period. So we ask about 20 issues that would not fit in the presentation, so I chose only 5. And the most prominent issue was tackling the immigration to Europe. That was on the top of the list of answers, where about 2/3 of our populations think that should be the focus of the next, or when I'm speaking to the current European Parliament. Compared to addressing the climate crisis and green policies, for example, Green Deal. And we are only at 28% of people who think that should be the focus of the European Parliament. So that doesn't seem very hopeful. But I think this question also tested the buzzwords Green Deal, because that has been a huge focus of many disinformative narratives, but also generally of political agenda, where people assume that people don't want to hear more about Green Deal, that it's all about forbidding cars, and they just don't want to push this agenda further. So that probably explains the very low figure, the very low number of people who want addressing climate change from our leaders. So compare it to the figure that Philip showed us regarding the word before, and this seems really not very hopeful, but there's a context. In Slovakia, this figure it's relatively better, especially compared to the #1 issue, tackling immigration. So in the Slovaks still feel like they want their European political leaders to do more on this issue, much more often than in Czech Republic. It's 37%. Yes, maybe because the anti-Green Deal agenda didn't go as far as in Slovakian policy. And this is the second election which had some probably international impact. So we are asking how hopeful and what expectations people have from the election of Donald Trump as the US president. So they in Czech Republic mostly they expect, I think it's more than half expects that he would improve the US economy. Again, this was asked just after the election. I think now the figures would be a bit different. And we also ask whether people expect some progress, some positive progress in addressing the threat of climate change, or just generally the issue of climate change. And you don't even see the figure. It's 14% who said that they are expecting some positive results from the then newly re-elected president of the United States. It's very similar in Slovakia, only the numbers are slightly bigger. Again, what we also do, and I think that's the part I like a bit more than the general questions that I presented in the beginning, is that we gather disinformation that are in fact online, that have been spread, and our partners from our partnering organizations have caught them online, and we test how credible these disinformation are and whether they were noticed by our respondents. Yeah. So by this way, we can say if some disinformation narrative has been widespread, or if it has just an insignificant impact, and if it has the potential to be to have a larger impact because it seems more trustworthy. We usually, in every wave of our questioning, we provide our respondents with the list of about 13 of these narratives. And because it's probably easy for them to understand what we are doing, we also add some claims that are in fact true to really test the respondents. So the blue one I'm showing you is that was the true one. The first week of July was the warmest on record globally. That's from last year, the July from last year, and most of the respondents said that this claim was credible, which is nice because it is actually true. But the second one, it is more general, says that global warming has not increased the frequency of natural disasters, and so on and so on. And we see that almost thirds of our population believes this disinformation. It was a bit abbreviated from the original post that we found, but the main issue is still there in the narrative. So we see that it's a large population that is willing to believe this. Some other issues I'll let you to read it while I talk, and I think just to compare it to other issues, we often test disinformation regarding healthcare, where for example, there has been a lot of circulating that the food producers are putting bug flour into their products or something, and that is dangerous, that there are molds, etc., etc. These disinformation are usually credible for about 10% of the Czech population and about 15-20% of the Slovak population. So when you compare it to the climate change issues, they seem more prominent and more impactful, that have a larger impact compared to other disinformation issues.
And even just a small reminder, you have 5 minutes to go.
Yes, thank you. Perfect. I think I will end on time. In Slovakia, we tested only 2 of these claims because we are limited in the Slovakian research a little bit by our budget. So we asked the general one. The first you see the numbers are virtually the same as in Czech Republic. The second one was that since 2019 there has bin a significant increase in Arctic ice, so it's the contrarian perspective. It's the thing that we see happening is not happening, and also about a fourth of the population believes this claim. So yeah, I hope in the future we've just currently involved some more of these narratives into our new questionnaires, Previously, we were focusing of the issue that seemed more prominent, at least in the media landscape, which is the war in Ukraine. So most of the narratives were from that sphere, also some anti-Western disinformative narratives. But now we are trying to focus more and more on climate change. Yeah, so these are some research method information and my name again. So do you have any questions?
Thank you so much, Ivan, for this very interesting overview. And I think there will be a lot of appetite to discuss further the findings, but unfortunately we have to move on to the next part of the training. So this last part of the training session will be dedicated to a pre-recorded interview with Professor Jos Delbeke. So our idea is to, in this interview, Paula Gori, our Secretary General, will present some of the main narratives on EU climate policy disinformation, and Jos will talk us through what the facts are behind these narratives.
Dear all, welcome to this talk. I'm Paola Gori. I'm the Secretary General of the European Digital Media Observatory, which is based at the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute. As you have learned also from our training sessions, climate disinformation is a huge issue of our times, and it also impacts quite a lot climate action. Climate disinformation narratives focus on a number of elements, starting with questioning actually the human causes of climate change to the impact and the solutions. As it often happens, they also cross with narratives in other fields like migration or health, just to mention a few examples. Among the targets of climate disinformation, we can find the policies in place in addressing climate change, and this is why I'm really glad to welcome today Jos Delbeke. Welcome, Jos.
Welcome. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Jos, for being here. So for those who don't know Jos, Jos is a leading expert of EU policies to address climate change. He holds the first EIB chair on climate policy and international carbon markets here at the SDG at the European University Institute. And he was previously Director General of the European Commission's DG for Climate Action. And he also developed Europe's international climate change strategy and was the European Commission's chief negotiator at the UNFCCC conference at the parties. And he played a key role in the EU's implementation of the Kyoto Protocol and in the negotiations of the Paris Agreement. So I guess you are the best place to help us today. And I have prepared 4 questions for you, and we will start with the first one. So DG Klima is very aware about the fact that disinformation can have an impact on climate action, as you were saying. And indeed, it has a webpage where you can find explanations and tools which are useful to citizens to better understand the EU policy and to defend themselves from climate disinformation. In addition, the recent 2024 communication on managing climate risks also mentions specifically a commitment to tackle climate disinformation. So considering your huge experience and expertise, both at the Commission as an outstanding climate policy experts, I wanted to ask you, like, when did the policy expert community actually realize that disinformation was having an impact, and how was this topic included into the policy discussions?
That's a very difficult question to answer, but in short, I think that the Commission always paid a lot of attention to explain things in an accessible manner to people, because that's the best way for a good democratic process. You give the arguments, the for and against, and then you come with a proposal. So we did that, over decades when we started around the years 2000 till now, climate policy in the EU. And we also invited stakeholders, who were impacted, and we brought first the news to them. But I have to admit that over the last couple of years, and since the European Green Deal, and since the emotions that were shown in favor and against climate change, that the landscape has changed. And it changed to the positive, and it changed, unfortunately, also to the negative. It changed to the positive when Greta Thunberg was mobilizing in the streets of Europe, where people came out, in favor of climate change and climate action. And that was an incredible help to bring the dossier forward and to make many policies accepted. But now we have a bit the backlash. And that is that people are sometimes saying, and they are not always wrong, have you not gone too far on this or on that? Have you assessed all consequences of one or the other piece of legislation? And in that sense, that kind of going too far sometimes provokes an avalanche of reactions through the social media. And so it's very good that DG Klima comes back, with this kind of explanation, facts-based, neutral, in order to avoid polarization. And that is a big enemy today. We have polarization in the climate debate, something that we never had before. In fact, when we started, we were basing our policies on incentives, on convincing people to join one or the other technology, having solar panels on the roof, or biking more, or buying electric vehicles, or what have you. So, seducing and incentivizing people to join the club. Unfortunately, today, we hear too many voices, shaming. If you do not do this or that, then you are spoiling the climate. And this kind of moralizing in the debate, I think, is having its, translation also to the social media, where this shaming, feels threatening to a lot of people, in limiting their civil rights or their margins of moving around, transportation, housing, etc. And we should pay attention to that. That's a worry I have. And in our SDG courses, where we have lots of policymakers coming over, we always emphasize the kind of pragmatic way of dealing with the policy, convincing people, incentivizing them economically, but not coming forward with naming, shaming, finger pointing. That provokes the reaction in the social media.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. Thank you so much. And you raised so many points: polarization, emotions, a lot of stuff that actually we deal a lot when it comes to disinformation. I think your point is very important. I mean, any change creates fear in people, so it is important to communicate in the best way, and also not be surprised that there might be some resistance towards change. Now, moving indeed towards disinformation, online we see claims that are circulating according to which the European Union is about to impose what is called a carbon passport. So this would be a passport to measure each individual's carbon emission and restrict their travel if they exceed a limit that is predefined. Could you tell us if this is really foreseen by the EU policy, and if not, where do you think it comes from?
It is not at all foreseen in European policy. And I think that would be absolutely the wrong way to do that. And that is why it was never considered. It's not the subject of any proposal. As I wanted to show in my first reply, it is about incentivizing people. It is about price signals. If you pollute, it may cost a little bit more. That is what we do. And if you do not pollute, you get the benefit. So it's an incentive to do the right thing. You leave your car behind and you take your bike, for example. That's what is good for the climate. But there are so many examples who are also good for your economic benefit by times. If you insulate your house so that you have to rely less on heating and less on air conditioning, that saves energy. And saving energy is good for climate, because every source of energy has a climate impact one way or the other. So incentivizing people, is more the rhetoric, and not, taking away the freedoms of people. And the freedom of movement is a very essential freedom. We may criticize rightly that airplanes are, emitting too many emissions, but they are essential in economic life. And it is a fact of luxury as well that we all enjoy. That's why we are taking a plane now and then. So we have to find the right balance. Taking a plane for a party, on the other side of the planet is perhaps not the wisest idea to do, but it's good that there are no digital passports or no carbon passports in order to count and again finger point to people. That, I think, would be a very negative, a very bad idea.
Yeah, indeed. So no limitations, rather opportunities and incentives. Thank you so much. So now another claim. This other claim that we see circulating online says that the European Union is planning to ban the repair of vehicles older than 15 years. or even actually seize them and scrap them. And here again, I wanted to ask you if this is actually foreseen, and if not, if you have any explanation where it comes from.
Well, no, it's not foreseen. What is foreseen is that by 2035, all cars that are brought to the market must have zero emissions. So that is as a perspective for car manufacturers. So we will all drive in 2035 either electric, most of us, or we will have a hydrogen or other, new things that are not yet really mature. But nobody will be forbidden to drive a second-hand car that is having an internal combustion engine. That is not envisaged. It's only by new cars that are going to be in the showroom. What does that mean? The second-hand car and repairing cars is very important, because we should not dash away our cars before the end of their lifetime. That's not economic either. And so, no, there is no such thing that has been addressed in car legislation. I did myself for years the car legislation of the European Union, and we again were incentivizing. We were talking to car manufacturers, and we were convincing them to go for the electric vehicle. And that got accelerated after the diesel scare, where it was proven that there was a problem with too many diesel cars in urban environments. And you see already the impact of that. Diesels are less popular. Electric vehicles are coming economically, and energy efficient vehicles are becoming a growing part of the fleet. And that's good. So no, maintaining our cars, and having them in a decent lifetime is good. It's also saving resources. If we would change our cars every 3-5 years, we would add to the mountain of scrap that is getting a problem as well. So no, I think again, common sense is what drives the legislature in Europe, and we see that worldwide. We see the same in China or Japan or the United States. So there may be emotions, how fast we should go with the electric vehicle. But it's and again, it's free to the individual, to go fast or to postpone. So it's not a question of taking away the freedom of people in their choice to, drive one or the other car.
I think you made two excellent points. One is like it is in the hands of individuals how fast they want to go into this direction, and the other, I thank you for making examples which go also beyond the EU, because very often what we also see in narratives is like, why should we do it in the EU if other countries or other regional parts of the world are not doing this? And so this was a very important point. So now we would like to profit from you, because we would like to ask you actually, if you could somehow explain to us which are the main pillars of the EU policy to fight climate change. I think this would be very useful as a knowledge for all of us, so that whenever we encounter content where we think that it might be actually disinformation, we are prepared to address it.
Well, the most important point is the polluter pays principle. It is in the Treaty of Rome. And it is an idea that comes from economists, and in particular from American economists. That is, when you do not have to pay at all for your pollution, nobody cares. So to make people care about their polluting behavior, it's good to have a price on the pollution. And that's what we do in Europe. Of course, we don't do it for everybody. That would be very complicated. But half of the emissions in Europe come from big companies. In the energy sector, in cement, in steel and chemicals, in pulp and paper, etc. And all companies, all big companies in Europe know the emissions trading system. And what is that system? That is that if you pollute, you have to pay for it. Today, the price is around 75 euros per ton of carbon dioxide. But you have the choice not to pollute, because that is exactly the incentive that is given if you employ new technology that is reducing your pollution. You have a clear benefit. So not polluting is beneficial. We do not want to ask people to stop producing. So the economy should run and continue to run, but it should run on good and climate-friendly technology. And to drive that into the market, the emissions trading system is very important. Now that is going to be widened up in 2 years' time to the individual polluter, in that sense that if you are choosing for a normal internal combustion engine, it's your right to keep driving such a vehicle, but then the fuel will become a little bit more expensive. And for two reasons. First, if you drive an electric vehicle, electricity is currently more expensive today in Europe because it has lots of environmental regulations, many more environmental regulations. So there is a bit of balance between the fuel at the pump and the electricity. But again, incentivizing people to switch to the less polluting option is a basic pillar of the European climate system. Of course, you cannot do everything related to that. You have to bring those technologies to the market. So you have to talk to the companies and to the engineers to design those new technologies. So innovation policy is another important policy. And then you have to pay for those people working hard on this alternative technology. So innovation policy is a very important one. Also, sustainable finance is another one. If you renovate your house and you do it really well, it's very expensive. So perhaps it's good that the bank is offering you a soft loan. Now, the European Central Bank is working very hard on that if you do environmentally the right thing, you get a cheaper loan. And that is one of the pillars. Incentivizing people is the European approach to climate action. And here and there, as I mentioned in my opening words, here and there things have gone a little bit far in deviating from what we do in Europe compared to the rest of the world. And now people are going into the polarization debate. The European Green Deal is being dismantled. I think that is not true. The European Green Deal is made more operational, here and there a bit more flexible when the legislator in the first phase was overlooking that. So when we look into the statistics, the emissions in Europe go down every year. In the emissions trading system sectors, we started in 2005. We are now 2025. In 20 years' time, we reduced the output of emissions by 50%. And we did not change the production. So the production increased. So this decoupling, like economists are telling us that, decoupling economic growth from emissions, I think is one of the pillars of European climate policy. And that continues. And that is where Ursula von der Leyen has made very clear that there are, of course, the world today looks very different compared to the world that looked 5 years ago when the Green Deal was championed. We have now a war in Ukraine. We have a war in the Mediterranean. We have Mr. Trump and tariff policy. We are vulnerable, as we see with the sanctions with Russia, etc. So the world is different. And so we have to adapt a little bit our climate policy to that different environment. But we are still doing it. We reduce our emissions day by day. And in the city environment, like in Florence or in many other cities, take Paris or London or whatever, we see many more bikers on the streets. We see much less cars on the streets. So that is indicating that that policy, in particular also in urban environments, is working very well.
Thank you so much, Joss. I had a last question, but it was partially already you already replied to it, but I will come with the question anyway, and you can see if you want to add something. So often the disinformation narrative that we see online, they somehow emphasize a potential negative impact of these climate policies, as we were saying, economic costs or like job losses, or in some cases also reducing individual freedom. So you already replied to most of this, but if you want to add anything, I think you are free to do that. I think it's very important also for those who follow us.
Indeed, and it's a very important point, because we do not want people to stop working. Because if you don't work, you do not emit carbon dioxide. That's not the way to go. But we want people to do different things. So we will have the same amount of transportation, but we may do it differently. Or we may have different ways of producing things. We have to shift from one technology to the other. And that's now what for the citizen is a bit of a problem. Citizens normally do not want change. They want to continue. So there is a certain inertia, in people's behavior. And that is why you need policies. And policies should go fast because climate change is a problem, but should not go too fast either. Otherwise, you scare people too much. So you have to find the right rhythm of doing and implementing policies. And that's a bit of an art. There is no mathematical model to say, even in Europe, you have very differences in the north or the south or the east or the west of Europe or in the world. Everybody has his own way of dealing with this inertia of people that needs to be overcome. And that's why policymaking is a human factory. You need politicians who well explain to people why they would like them to change from technology A to technology B. That's why we go from diesel cars to highly energy efficient petrol cars to electric cars. And not everybody is already a fan of the electric vehicle, but it takes some time. And the time it takes, the gradual approach helps implementing the policy. We should not jump all of us overnight, from one technology to the other. Let's do it gradual to the preference of the people. And that is also the essence of democracy and democratic decision-making, that you respect different opinions. Yes, you have to move ahead, but you do not insult people who are taking a slower path, or you do not praise yourself because you are going on a faster path. Let's be very democratic in this, that if we as a community work together with the right incentives, with a gradual approach, which is well set out and thought through by the policymakers, I think we can make a difference. And on climate, we reduce every day our emissions in Europe. And I think we can be proud of that. We would hope that other parts of the world are doing the same. And unfortunately, if we compare and look across the Atlantic to the United States, they go back to the old technologies. At least at the top, the president would like to go back. I doubt whether that going to succeed, because technology and cleaner technology is on its way. It's becoming cheaper. It's becoming very high comfort. Driving an electric car is not reducing your comfort, just the opposite. So I think we are moving there, but there are differences in Europe, and there are even more and more important differences in the world. And we have to cope with them. We have to knock on their door and say, look, why are we moving away from the good and promising technologies if there are other ones we can leave behind?
I think I really like this approach, this idea of policymakers that actually do policy, but they take into consideration the emotions and the feelings of people. This is really important, that it's a relief to know that policymakers in this sector are acting this way. And I marked what you say when you say making it differently, because if we look back at our history, we always moved ahead by making it differently. So I think it's really important what you said, and the fact that you insisted on technology, because indeed it's technology. And as we accept technological development in other sectors, I think we can accept it also here. Joss, it was really a pleasure talking to you. I warmly thank you, because it was a really good conversation, and I think it was really extremely helpful and useful for our audience. And I hope that there will be other occasions to have such conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula. This was a very pleasant conversation, and I wish good luck to all the the watchers of this video. Good luck with a very important effort. Thank you.
Thank you.